I'm super excited to be here and really excited about the great turnout we have and how many people are here tonight. I think there's over 100 people, which is just incredible. This workshop is the first in a 3-part series put on jointly by the NFUO, the NFU Ontario, and the Ontario Farmland Trust. And we're very grateful for the support of the Greenbelt Foundation in funding this workshop. This workshop is part of a larger land linking project we're working on in Ontario to match up landholders with land seekers. So I definitely encourage you all to check out our next 2 workshops. There are the next 2 Thursdays at the same time as this workshop. And I also invite you all to fill out a short questionnaire that we have. We're going to post it in the chat. And we're using this questionnaire to gather information from landholders and land seekers so we can go through and see where folks may match up. And just to let everyone know, we will never share any of your information without your permission. I'd like to now do a land acknowledgement. I'm in Hamilton and I'll offer a land acknowledgement for the land that I'm on. And I encourage everyone in the chat right now to indicate where they live and the relevant Indigenous territory or treaty to you. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So with that, we'll move into things. Just to let everyone know, this workshop is being recorded and it'll be shared on YouTube. The breakout rooms, however, are not going to be recorded. We anticipate the workshop will be about 2 hours, so we're aiming for around a 9 p.m. wrap, but we do encourage discourse in the breakout rooms, for sure. If you're having any technical issues during the webinar, just send a direct message to one of the moderators, myself or Eric McVeigh, who's on tech support tonight. And I'll now introduce our presenter, Cheyenne Sundance. Cheyenne Sundance runs a farm called Sundance Harvest. It's a year-round 1.5-acre farm north of Toronto. Sundance Harvest is a greens, roots, herbs, tomato, cucumber, peppers, and other salad-based vegetables-oriented farm that has 4 seasonal 10-week CSAs throughout the year. Cheyenne has, for the last 2 years, done work related to racial equity in agriculture by trying her best to provide both economic growth and education opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and persons of color, new farmers in Ontario through the not-profit Growing in the Margins and her advocacy work. So take it away, Cheyenne.
Thank you, Sunil, for the great introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Cheyenne Sundance. I'll be leading this workshop today. I'm really excited to lead this workshop today, and I really love to see, in the chat, people saying hello, introducing themselves. I think that's a really great way to get started, adding that into the chat. And really, the format of today's workshop is going to be, I'll be talking for a bit, really just breaking down different types of land linking and giving you some tips and giving you also some examples of projects that you may draw inspiration from. And then at the end, I'll be providing a host of resources for both land seekers, so people who like to farm, and then landholders, people who are able to provide like a lease or a land agreement. And then we're going to really dive into those breakout rooms, which is going to be a big chunk of the time. And we're going to divide our breakout rooms into East, Central, and West Ontario. So I know that may be a bit vague, but because, we're not a super big group tonight, this will allow a really full body discussion, which is something that I'm really excited for. And to really kick it off, we have a survey just to see kind of who's kind of here in terms of the demographics of like who's the landholder and who's that land seeker and maybe what regions in Ontario you are. So if someone could post that survey up, you can, yeah, there we go. So I'm going to answer it myself. Okay. I can see some people, a lot of folks so far in West Ontario, you know, the Hamilton, the Guelph, the Kitchener-Waterloo area. If you're wondering what KW is, stands for Kitchener-Waterloo. Okay, I'm seeing there's some people who are landholders here tonight, which is super great. Uh-huh. I'm really excited to be sitting inside warm today because all day I was hauling wood chips because my farm is doing a U-pick operation next year. So we have wood chips on the walkway for people to walk on, so it's not mud. So all day in the field, and I get to sit down and have a cozy evening. So I'm really excited about that. Okay, I think we have like 14 people voted. That's pretty good. Maybe some of you in the chat to kind of see who is here. And regarding Hillary's comment in the chat, no category for BIPOC landholder, I kept that fairly broad because this workshop is actually about BIPOC land opportunities. I'm going to be centering that experience of the BIPOC land seeker. This workshop is not about BIPOC landholders, so that's why I didn't actually center that in the actual survey, because I want to make sure that the space centers the land seekers and not the landholders. So that's fine. But if you have any other comments about that or questions, you're welcome to send me a message or also engage later on. But that's really why, because the workshop is primarily only for land seekers that are BIPOC. So I hope that answers your question. Great. Okay, I think we're gonna head into the workshop now. And for the comment in the chat that from Cassie, so yeah, this workshop is really about land linking, like hence like, you know, the title and the kind of the format what we're talking about today. You're welcome to join any breakout room you feel drawn to. Yeah, but we're mainly focusing on like finding new BIPOC farmers, spaces for next season, and basically discussing how to go about that. But your comments and your observations are always welcome. So I think let's go into the slideshow so we can have optimal time for the chat later. Cool. So this is a really cool thing. So this workshop's about BIPOC land linking. I will be talking about the different types of land linking options. Again, this is a workshop directly about BIPOC land opportunities, land linking opportunities. So this is mainly going to be ideal, hence like the title and the description, for someone who's focused on for-profit farming or farming, let's say in a larger area. So maybe not like 1/8 of an acre, but maybe like half an acre. But I have added a lot of different types of land linking opportunities and options with that. But this will be a really good workshop for someone who's looking to farm really next year and looking to farm as a career or even as a side job. Next slide, please. And to dive in about myself, so you already kind of know I run Sundance Harvest. I actually lease, so I know a few things about like land linking, because for a while I leased in the city here, at least in Toronto and North Toronto and down Park. Very shortly, I actually leased in a rural area in West Ontario. And from my experiences and my friends' experiences, I got to gain a lot of insight on the diversity of different land linking opportunities and also the positive and negatives that came with it. So I found that to be quite beneficial in terms of me understanding the process of land linking as a young farmer who's running a for-profit farm. And I have a lot to say about it. So let's start off. So, and if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, we can keep it to the end, just right before the breakout rooms, just so it can be more streamlined. So incubator farm. So an incubator farm, if you're not sure what that means, is basically a plot of land where many different farmers actually farm together. Not together as in a business, but they're kind of neighbors. So each of them have their own organization, has their own kind of group they're doing, and they grow crops for their own business. But they oftentimes share things like infrastructure, so greenhouses, hoop houses, a wash and pack station, tools. They share things like a CSA space for pickup. Maybe they share customers as well. But basically, incubator farm is a way for new farmers to get started, and they often provide an avenue for mentorship, because a lot of incubator farms have an educational component involved and other people around your age, so you can feel like you're in a community, which is a really great thing to do your first year, because it is very scary starting a brand new farm without much support. So they are a great way to get started. And besides that, the incubator farms that I've seen BIPOC farms enter, overall, there's not a lot of them in Ontario, but the ones I've seen, they weren't all supportive. So the idea in theory is great, but the actual practice does matter a lot. So when you're thinking about joining an incubator farm as a BIPOC land seeker, as we're trying to center the voices of BIPOC land seekers in this workshop as well, you want to kind of figure out, okay, what is the space you're going to visit? I always highly recommend doing a few visits before you actually commit to anything. So, go with a friend or two, hang out, and get to know the people who are in the site, get to know the other farmers and things like that. But of course, get to know who's actually running the site. So who is in the positions of leadership, who makes the decision, oh, this person gets a plot, this person doesn't get a plot, and see if the team is really diverse and representative of the actual incubator farmers that want to be there. And that's a really important thing that most of us know. Representation matters a lot. And then beyond that, do you know any farmers that can vouch for the actual location? And basically what I mean by that is, do you know any farmers of color who have been to the incubator farm who have positive words about it, or positive experiences, or even negative experiences? Because you can learn from both of those experiences regarding really what you want to do. And if you don't see any of the above, what I would do if I was you is just wait a few more years and just kind of see if anything changes, but then move on to your next option. You can play it, risky and try it out, but I find that these kind of three elements do make a really good incubator farm. So longer term incubator farms tend to have more reviews. I don't want to say reviews, but I don't know any other way to say it, from farmers of color, queer farmers, trans farmers, all the farmers who are often marginalized in farming. So longer term incubator farms will tend to have at least one or two of these groups coming through the doors. And in that case, if you're having an interview with the incubator farm owner, what you want to do is ask references for them. So oftentimes people are expected, oh, what are your own references as a land seeker? So instead you should be like, well, what are your references from past incubator farmers that actually were on your site? And there's nothing wrong with asking that. You're actually doing your research and making sure that the space is safe and okay for you. So you can just simply straight up ask, do you know anyone who previously was an incubator farmer here that I can get in contact with just to learn their experience and get to know about the space? And most of the time, people are going to be very friendly and open about it, because why wouldn't they want to let you know about the space? But overall, I will be giving you some resources of some incubator farms I know here in Ontario and one in Ottawa. So I think incubator farms are a really great option, and hopefully there'll be more in the future. Because a really big plus side is you don't have to buy a lot of infrastructure. Next slide, please. So short-term lease. So because we're talking about farm linking, this is probably one of the most common types of farm linking for for-profit farms. And a short-term lease is a really great option if this is your first year and you aren't actually sure if farming is for you. Or maybe you want to try something new, like you want to try raising chickens or sheep. And you know that, okay, this is a big thing you're trying out and you don't want to actually commit too much in case you don't like raising chickens or sheep. So a short-term lease can usually be 1 to 2 years. I recommend 1 year to start off with because a full season, you can really gain a lot of insight in terms of what you like and what you don't like. For shorter term leases, existing infrastructure like water is a must because you don't know if you'll actually want to invest in trucking water over in a big cooler or a big tote, or if you want to actually work and invest in establishing a well on site. So it's a really big deal to actually have water your first year. If you're in an area that the rainfall is actually enough for your crops, and this is of course depending on what crops you're growing. If you're growing like lettuce compared to dry beans, then that's a totally different story. But it's just about kind of that. But water is a must thing, I would say, for it's quite important. Things like a house, build a package are nice, but I wouldn't consider them a priority for you one. Mainly because you want to just focus on kind of seeing if the site works for you, if the soil is arable, and if you like it. And a good thing is to ask the farmer, bring my view off because I have a bit spotty internet here. I actually ask the landholder who's giving you the lease in terms of this. If you are, wanting to farm a 1 acre site, but it's all grass and it's all brush, how are you going to really turn that into soil to plant those beans, to plant the corn, to plant any crop you'd like to plant? And if the person who you're leasing from has tractors, implements, let's say a BCS, a flail mower, it would be a really good idea to ask them ahead of even getting the lease if they'd be open to preparing the land to soil for you and tilling the land, or maybe not tilling depending on what you like to farm with. But this would be a really good opportunity for you to ask that before you get the lease, because it's really, in my opinion, not a good idea to invest in a tractor or BCS in your first year, because again, you may not actually want to farm beyond that first year. And this is a really good way to experiment, but also have the land prepped. Next slide, please. So longer term leases. So leases that are 5 years or more, they do have benefits if you want to start building infrastructure such as greenhouses, permanent hoop houses, and establishing rotational grazing if you're raising livestock. Long-term leases I recommend to get into if you've been farming for a few years. You would kind of know this is really what you want to do. And I have lots of friends who raise livestock, and most of them have long-term leases because, again, rotational grazing is a very lovely way to raise livestock, but it does take a couple years to really get into the swing of things. And of course, things like steer, cows, they can take a long time to grow. Ensure your agreement is actually outlined very fully. So if you're doing a long-term lease and you're growing something like raspberries or strawberries or blueberries, you want to make sure in the lease it actually includes those plants that you're bringing into the landscape are the property in terms of the legality of the lease. I have a friend who's actually leasing, and they were leasing, and they grew lots of raspberry bushes. They were a beautiful raspberry farmer, and they actually closed their lease because they purchased land to start a bigger farm, and they took all their raspberry plants, and they made this known in their initial lease that anything that they're bringing onto the farm, like the live plants, are their property, and they're going to remove it when they leave. It's a really important thing for a long-term lease to also include this, because you don't want the leaseholder, and then the landholder to have any conflict at the end of the lease when, all the plants get removed and the soil is bare again. So you do want to have things like that in the lease just to make sure it's quite clear. But again, long-term leases are a really great option, especially if you're raising livestock. I highly recommend a long-term lease. Next slide. Thank you. So co-ops, so cooperatives are super cool. I don't think they're often talked about enough. I actually worked at a cooperative grocery store for a bit, so I know a lot about cooperatives. But you can either start a co-op from scratch, and in terms of cooperatives, I will be using the word both in the legal form, so actually like a legal, registered cooperative, and then the loose form in terms of a group of people growing together and just being as a group together. So you can start a co-op from scratch, find a couple other farmers, a couple other people who have the same ideals as you, would like to kind of grow the same things as you or different things. And you as a joint collective or a legally formed cooperative can actually lease or purchase, if that's what you would like, land collectively. I've seen cooperatives work really well when each party has their own plot of land to farm on instead of collectively farming together. I find that it's harder to divide the labor across crops from what I've seen. Some really cool cooperatives that I've seen is the Farm Agricola. It's in Quebec, or Firm Agricola because it's French. And then Beatbox Farm Cooperative near Ottawa, I think. And then another one is 10 Mothers Farm in Raleigh, North Carolina. So those are just 3 options. And I'll actually add it to the chat if some people want to check it out, because I know sometimes I like to do that deep Instagram dive. 10 Mothers Farm. And then, so all of these 3, they're basically cooperatives. I think there's 2 that are legal cooperatives, and then the other one I'm not sure. But with these ones, they have plots of land or they farm collectively. So another option is if you don't want to start one from scratch because maybe you don't have friends who farm, or maybe it's harder to find people in your area, you can join an existing cooperative. So this might be a bit trickier because you're going to be joining something that's already been established. But if you have an idea of exactly the environment you like to farm in and the people, this actually may work. Again, I would say take a solid couple months to make your decision. It takes a long time to get a feel for someone. And for something like a cooperative, you're being very in close contact with each other and you're literally working and you're oftentimes living with each other. So it's a big, big risk and a big jump for some people. I've seen full diet CSAs, which basically means that, your grains, your beans, your protein, your fruits, your vegetables, all are in one box. I've seen those types of cooperatives where not all the members actually farm on the same area, but in the local region. And each cooperative member grows or raises a type of food and they sell their box cooperatively. So I've seen a full diet cooperative model done in a few times. I think Farmhouse Food in Ottawa is a really great local example of that. And there's a few other ones as well I'm probably not mentioning. But if you don't think that farming cooperatively in the same area, in the same plot, is doable, you could also do this with other friends as well. And if all of you are leasing, this might be actually a very viable marketing opportunity for you. The really good thing with cooperatives is you actually don't have to buy all the tools for yourself. You can jointly purchase these tools because, how often are you going to use a flail mower if you're just growing something like watermelon or any types of melon? You're going to use that like twice a year. But if your neighbor is growing something like salad greens, they might use a flail mower like once a month. So actually doing a cooperative allows you to save a lot of money because you can jointly be purchasing these tools and then sharing it amongst each other, which is a really cool thing to do. Next slide. Great. So these slides, I have like 2 slides just for people who are landholders. And this is a few tips that I've gathered. And again, keep in mind, I'm coming at this from like the for-profit farm angle. And again, for people who are seeking for next season or seeking to actively be thinking about leasing land. So before you offer the space to any new farmers, what I'd recommend is to write your lease agreement and let it sit for a week. Go back to it, review it a few times. You really want to make sure whatever you write in the lease is in stone. The worst thing for a new farmer is to be promised a hoop house to start their seedlings in a lease, and then mid-spring the landholder decides they change their minds. That's something that you never really want to do to a new farmer, as most of you know. So really, if you have any doubts, really let that sit for a while and then go back to it. Make space for month or seasonal feedback meetings. These are really important to actually set the space to talk about, the roses and the thorns of the communication and of the actual agreement. If this is your first year doing an agreement like this or doing a lease like this, there's going to be a lot to learn. So be really graceful with yourself. And I found that my friends who lease, they really like doing seasonal feedback meetings because oftentimes monthly is a bit too much. So it's up to you. And then, of course, have an upfront conversation with how little or how much you'd like to be hands-on. Do you need a weekly in-person check-in? Are you okay with meeting seasonally? Do you expect the person to be there to help you around with like farm chores and like feeding animals? Are you okay with them, really seeing you around? So really be upfront. I would say if you think you're being too detailed, you probably aren't. It's always good to be overly detailed and overly express what you're expecting early on, then later on there being a conflict. Next slide, please. And of course, with this obviously to be said, you want to have as much as you can in writing. I've had, friends of mine, best friends, actually one leased land to another, and they just had it on a verbal handshake. And you can't guess what's going to happen in the future. And sometimes friendships fail. So even the closest of friends, I always recommend having something in writing just so you can know. And at the end, I'll be providing a template for people that I found that was really helpful to me for you all. So having a space for you, the farmers who are leasing from you to store tools is crucial because this actually allows them not to have to bring back heavy tools back and forth. And if you don't already, consider getting a separate shed for your tenants. This is important, especially if you have similar tools. So you don't want the case of the broad fork being missing, being blamed on a tenant when maybe your staff just left that in the field. So having a separate shed does allow that independence for both parties. How comfortable are you with having people at your site? So if your tenants, for example, are leasing, 2 acres, 10 acres, they may actually have staff. Are you comfortable with there being, 10 people at a time? Are you comfortable with your tenant hosting sites? If the actual area that you're leasing is maybe your farm home site, then you may want to consider this as well. And then really the last part is to figure out pricing for the lease. So this is probably one of the biggest questions I've ever gotten when I'm trying to give people advice on leasing. If you're deciding on the arrangement, it's really best to ask for local farmers in your area who are also leasing, because per region, it's going to vary a lot. What a lease is in Thunder Bay is going to be much different than in Hamilton. So you do just want to get to know and go to, maybe your local farmer Facebook groups or maybe your local NFU meetings and ask others, hey, do you lease? What is like the price per acre annually you're doing? And that is really how you're going to hone in and find your price. I can tell you what I lease for. So yearly for like 1 acre, and again, I'm in the GTA, so it's really high. I think it's like a couple $100 or maybe like something like that. But I have a very, very high lease. I think it's more so like $800, $900 or something like that. But in other areas, in rural areas, you're often going to have to find like an annual lease for like an acre, maybe $100, maybe $150. So not a lot, maybe as cheap as $50. So it's really, again, based on the area. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give 2 and actually I'm going to give 4 examples of things. So in terms of Incubator Farms, a really cool farm that I like, St. Ignatius Farm, it's actually in Guelph. And what they do is they rent out and they have leases for people who would like to start their own farm businesses. And I'm going to add the link into the chat. They're in Guelph, and I find that they are quite fun to be around. I think there's someone here who is actually from St. Ignatius Farm, and you can rent acreage, and they have infrastructure on site to support new farmers. And there's many young farmers who are actually involved in this farm, so you wouldn't be alone, and you'd be able to communicate and get to know other young farmers. And if you're from St. Ignatius, you're welcome to say hello in the chat, because I think I saw a couple people from there. I think Julian's actually on this call, so hi, Julian. So next is spin farming. So spin farming, you may have heard of it, you may not. I actually wanted to include this because not everyone heard of spin farming. So spin farming is basically a small plot and intensive something, and it's when you farm multiple different backyards. There's a really cool farm in BC called City Beat Farm. Check the link in the chat. And they farm multiple backyards in the same neighborhood, and they run a very viable, profitable farm. I will say those words because oftentimes people think, oh, it's just so small plots. How are they able to make a profit? The really way they're able to make it viable, and this is kind of what I really want to hone in here because many of you want to start a farm as a career, is they have the plots very close to each other. You want to make sure that they're not like neighborhoods and neighborhoods away, that they're relatively close to each other. And at each plot, they tend to grow a theme. So they grow greens in one area, or root vegetables in one area, or fruit and crops in one area. So that way they can keep the tools on each site actually consolidated for what they need. You don't want to have salad greens at 4 different sites because then you need like 4 different harvesters, right? You want to keep your tools set at each area so you don't have to buy multiple tools. And spin farming is very simple and easy to get started with. Really, this works best in a suburban or urban area. So if you're in a rural area, this probably doesn't matter at all. But I want to include this for people who live in the more urban area and suburban areas. And there's lots of information on City Beat Farm if you look at their website. Another example, if you would like to learn about flower farming, is My Luscious Backyard. Sarah Dixon actually ran this in Toronto. She's closed it down now, but she was a very, very profitable urban flower farm. And I say this again, the word profitable, because she ran a business and she had a career with it, and it was really rare to see at the time. So I think this is a really good example if you'd like to run a business through this kind of model. Next slide. So the resource FarmLink is very, very beneficial. I actually like FarmLink resource. I find the interface is fairly easy to use. And if you're in a rural area, FarmLink is quite cool. If you check out the link in the chat, you can see that there's going to be lots of kind of classified ads where people describe themselves and what they're looking for, the land, the acreage. And there's both sections for people who are looking for land to farm and people who are offering land to farm. So that is quite cool in terms of being able to kind of see everything. So check that out if you haven't already. And then really the last example, because I didn't want to get too into the weeds with this, is Just Food Startup program in Ottawa. So this program is super cool. It's been going on for a while, actually, for some years. And it's basically an incubator farm. They provide infrastructure. There's other people farming at the site. And you get to start up your own farm organization or your own farm business at the site, and you also get some marketing help because they do also help you market your vegetables. So really check them out. I have the link in the chat. If you're in the Ottawa area, this would probably be my biggest suggestion to you to get started. It's really good to do an incubator farm that's been around for a while because, again, you can get really awesome reviews from past farmers, maybe not so awesome reviews, but at least you get some testimonials from people who've actually been at the site and can tell you how the environment is and also like how the soil is and things like that. Next slide, please. So there's like 2 more slides or so until we start our breakout rooms, which I'm super excited about. But to begin, what are some important considerations for farming while BIPOC in a rural setting? So again, this workshop is about BIPOC farm linking opportunities, and really I'm trying to provide opportunities for BIPOC farmers to have spaces to find new places to grow next season. So really the considerations you do want to face if you're BIPOC in a rural setting is that there's simply less of us and you might face some discrimination. I have in a rural setting, and also the community isn't as large in terms of BIPOC people or maybe your own cultural background, so you might feel a bit isolated. So if I was moving to a rural setting, what I would really try to do is make roots however I can. If you have friends in the city, ask them if they know anyone in a rural place. There's always a few people that you can kind of find, hopefully. There's a group on Facebook that I like, is called QT BIPOC Country Living. And this is I'm going to add it into the chat, but that's a really good group. I would say just search that up on Facebook if you use Facebook. If you don't, I'm sorry. But if you don't, you can also sign up for the BIPOC working group that the NFU has, and maybe Sunil can drop that link into the chat. There's lots of people who live rurally and who are BIPOC in that chat. So if you would like to even discuss their own experiences, you have a space as well using the Google group. And so if you don't want to be on social media, that's a good alternative as well. But those are the main, I would say, considerations as 1, discrimination, 2, prejudice. And again, For me personally, I'm probably not going to move back rurally unless I have like a family with me that reflects me, that looks like me, or friends as well of color, simply because I find that community is really important. This is also, why I think for new farmers of color, incubator farms that have some diversity are a really good place to start off with, because at least you have people you can talk with. And then, of course, one of the biggest considerations if you're leasing is making sure the person you're leasing from has similar ideals to you and also values equity in the same way as you. Doesn't just see you as a paycheck, but instead sees you as a person who they want to develop a bond with. And I'm guessing if some, landholders are here today, you guys are probably going to feel that way anyways if you're signing up for this workshop. So again, consider that it's not going to be all roses. It's probably going to be harder than living in the city in terms of seeing that representation. But again, if you establish a community before you move, I find that has helped a lot of my friends who are now rural farming and of color. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are ways as a landholder you can try to create a welcoming and conscious space for further connections with BIPOC farmers? So there's a few ways. One way is to know that you're constantly going to be learning. No one in life, I think, knows everything. So understanding that you were made with one mouth and two ears is a very important thing to know. That means you should be listening twice as much as you speak. That's something that I'm slowly learning as well. But the first thing is to just understand that you will probably screw up every now and then, and that's okay. But as long as you can come out of it and listening to the feedback and the actionable items people need, then that's all right. The second thing I would say is really try to follow, read, and understand more equity in agriculture. Some really great accounts I personally like following. One is obviously Soulfire Farm. They're pretty popular. And then aside from that is the Agrarians Commons. And the Agrarian Commons, or I think it's Agrarian Trust. They're a group that actually works on a lot of land trusts in the States. So I find that they come toward it with a more equity framework. And really, I find these two organizations have allowed me to share a lot of posts and flyers with landholders itself. But of course, beyond that, just make sure that, again, you are reducing the barriers. So if you can offer a reduced price, try to do that. If you can make space for the land seekers to have, events with their friends or have ways to uplift their business, or even share about their CSA, also do that. Simply sharing about, your tenant's CSA on your Instagram is also going to help as well. But then aside from that, to know that, they're not there to teach you, they're there to farm most likely, and to just try to do as much of the work as you can on yourself. On my website, I actually have a learning resources page. So I would say if you're interested in leasing out land, maybe read that learning resources page first. Maybe, hopefully, Sunil, because you're so good at internet stuff, you can go to my website and add the learning resources page to the chat because I'm speaking. But that's what I would really say, is to start from there and then have conversations with other farmers, especially other white farmers, about your experiences with having leases and also what they're actually actively doing to bring more equity into their farming practice. So that could look like having better representation on your staff that looks like people in charge or look like people of color. It could look like just sharing and uplifting, land defenders' work. It could also look like sharing and uplifting people who are doing activism work regarding racial equity and things like that. Next slide. Thank you, Sunil, for adding the learning resources. So further resources I have, there's actually a really cool land access guide for Ontario that Young Agrarians made that was adapted by the National Farmers Union of Ontario. So I'm actually going to add that into the chat right now. I recommend every land seeker to read through this. This helped me so much when I still got started farming. Endless, happy, perfect resource from the NFU. Really big fan of it if you haven't heard that already. And I'm actually going to be adding to the chat a template for a lease agreement. You could use this in how you see fit, but this template I find is really beneficial. You don't have to use all of it, but this is going to be a really good place to start with. Again, you have to actually plug in certain parts, but I find it quite good. And then aside from that, the resources, there's also one other resource I'd like to share, local farm and food co-op. So if you're interested in cooperatives, I know some people have, in the chat mentioned cooperatives. This is a really good resource for cooperatives. My friend Susanna, and she's an all-star, such a cool cat. So I added that to the chat, and there's a lot of cool farms that are cooperatives that you can check out. Maybe they're in your region, because this is a very Ontario-based website. And if you're interested in joining a cooperative instead of getting one started, then this is a good resource for you. But I would say that's really all I have for the slideshow. So what we're going to do is cut off the slideshow, and I'm going to be back here in my video, and we are going to start the breakout rooms. So just before we're going to get started, what I'd like to say with the breakout rooms is I know that 3 rooms is a bit vague, but I wanted to make sure that there's enough people in there so there could be a fully fleshed out, really conversation about everything as much as you want. And beyond that, oh, hi, Kat. Beyond that, in the breakout rooms, we're going to really make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. So please try to keep each of your points to about 2 minutes. Your points probably are lovely and we all want to hear it, but we also want to make sure some people, especially people who are maybe shyer, has a chance to still get their points heard, or even ask a question or make a comment. And that's a really important piece I want to share. I'm going to let Eric kind of say his piece if he wants to say something to start us off.
Thank you, Cheyenne. That was a great presentation. Yes, the breakout rooms are now open, so they are labeled by the region. So you can go ahead and join in a moment. If you are living in a place where you might want to be in more than one, then you have the freedom to leave one breakout room and go to another during the course of the next hour or so. So I think you can go ahead and join your room. If you have any technical problems, just send me a message. And there will be a moderator in each room. See you there.
Hi, everyone. We're just going to let everyone trickle in from the closed breakout rooms. I'm also going to add some more resources to the chat because I know that there's some new people here who maybe missed the initial presentation. So I'm just going to add in again all the links I did initially. So feel free to check those helpful links out regarding finding land to farm at, Incubator Farms, or the Land Access Guide from the NFU and the Young Agrarians. And while we have people kind of trickling in, does anyone have any final questions before we end? There will be a recording for the actual slideshow presentation because there's a lot of helpful information in there. But does anyone even have any final questions? Yeah, I can see this hand. Hello, other folks. You can already see that maybe but I added it again. My other links and you all connect. You would like to connect, you can add your email to the chat if you feel like you really made some really conversations with people. If you'd like to have help regarding finding a place to grow food or finding sellers actually in the chat. And it was really nice to, yeah, like Adam said, for the conversation and having a space to hear everyone's experiences. Does anyone have any final questions before we finish off and let some like maybe Eric or Sunil close up the presentation? Okay, if there's no any final comments, maybe Eric or Sunil can close off the presentation.
Sunil, would you like to do that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming out today. I think we've gotten some great information, and I really appreciate everyone's time. Before we disband for the evening, I'm just going to plug our Google survey, the questionnaire, one more time. I'll paste it in the chat here. It's just a really great tool for us at the NFUO to get information on what landholders have to offer and what land seekers need, so we can make some matches. Yeah, I think that's it. Huge thank you to the Greenbelt Foundation for funding this workshop, this webinar, and thank you to everyone for coming out. And thank you so much, Cheyenne, for presenting today.
Bye. And I have all the resources in the chat. I did that again.
Again, thank you very much for the meeting. I appreciate it. Y'all have a good evening.
See you later.